This is an open meeting of the Berlin Historical Commission, February 17th. We gathered at 11 o'clock a.m. and it is now about 11:05. Present is Barry Yeager, Janet Woodward, Eleanor Bergen, Daniel Barton, and Thomas Lamb, and myself, June Miller. And we may have our fifth commission member, Lucy Ayers, joining us.
And we are being recorded.
Fantastic. Well, good morning to all. I'm assuming that we have the ability to share the screen. And
yes,
as a high level introductory, go ahead, Barry, what were you about to say?
You and Tom both could do screen sharing.
Okay, all right. Well, I know you've all had time to walk through the building with Tom, which was, what was that, December?
Yeah.
Or was it November?
November
Okay.
19th or 17th.
Great. And then, Tom followed up with, in my opinion, a very clear and concise letter of his findings and some recommendations. And my goal today is to talk through the three options for the foundation, because each one of the options has its pros and its cons. And Tom and I have organized those pros and cons into a matrix that I'd like to talk through today. We can certainly share it with you in a hard copy after the meeting, if you want to talk through it further. But I want to make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of the opportunities and constraints associated with each one of those approaches, knowing that we do have to select one in order to move forward and make sure that we're properly, addressing structural concerns underneath the building. I don't want to spend a lot of time today talking about a couple of the other recommendations in Tom's letter that I think are very straightforward. For instance, in the back portion of the building, there were a couple other notes about, management of water, drainage, et cetera. To me, it's really today the focus to be looking at the foundation of the house itself. And, as questions come up, we'll talk them through. Then after we get through that, if we have a little bit of time left, I would just like to revisit very briefly any comments from the commission or thoughts since we met last time and looked through a couple of options for layout of the building and where we might put accessible parking, just so that I'm up to speed on what the commission's been thinking about since then, so we can best formulate how to move forward. Sound good?
Good.
Okay, excellent. So I will do a screen share and hopefully it will work. Are you all at this point seeing a matrix?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
we'll step out of there. And I also have Tom's letter up here as well. But as a place to start, there are three high-level options. And Tom, you please chime in, if you want to give any more detail that I'm going to in the introduction. But, high level is a full replacement of the foundation. That certainly requires lifting up the building, pulling out everything that's there, and does.
Dan, you've muted yourself.
Okay, you all just disappeared right while I was talking.
Yeah, you had a glitch or something there. Yeah.
Okay.
You need to reshare too.
Am I sharing again?
You are?
Okay. Yeah, I have found that this is sometimes an issue with Zoom. So hopefully you're looking right at my screen again. So just talking about, the three options at a very high level. Option one being a complete replacement of the existing foundation and all that goes along with that. Option two being a rather hybrid approach, if you will, where the existing foundation is left in place but we're reinforcing and enhancing it. And the third option being the existing foundation stays in place and we're really just making a Band-Aid repair effort, inside out, what have you, in order to ensure that it's as stabilized as it can be in its existing fashion. Make sense so far?
Mhm.
Okay, so let's talk through the advantages of each one of these options. And I think what's very interesting is that you look at this graphically, you can see that there are a lot of advantages to option one, and they diminish a bit as you move towards option three. But the first being that in option one, you're really structurally creating the very best solution for the building. It would be a new foundation, solidly built and designed with drainage incorporated along with it. And at the same time, can easily be combined with a drainage solution on the outside of the building. It is providing optimal access to be able to get in underneath the building and not just do the foundation itself on the perimeter, but internal work as well. That might be additional footings, a new concrete slab, with some drainage underneath it, et cetera. The house, we can make a determination, does it want to be set back on a foundation at exactly the height where it sits now? Or do we want to change it 6 or 8 inches in order to be able to accomplish something else, whether it be accessibility or some other exterior design feature that gives us that ability. It may provide an opportunity that while the house is elevated, to do some repairs in areas to the sills. And Tom, do you want to comment on that one? I mean, I threw that in the chart, and I don't know if that is or isn't really the case. I was just, from a constructability perspective, it seemed like you could be doing some support in a way that enables you to replace those sills. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, it would be easier to replace the sills once the building's lifted to put the new foundation underneath it, if that option is chosen.
Right.
If you're replacing sills in any of these scenarios, you're doing some amount of jacking, either locally in a small area or on perhaps a single side of the building to replace a sill. And chances are, with a building this age with that type of foundation, there's sill rot. And I think the contractor's report noted that, if I remember right. So yeah, it's certainly a little bit easier if the whole building's up in the air. You can see all the sill rot, the sill damage is obvious at that point. It's easier to inspect it, find the damage, and easier to replace it.
Right, that's what I was thinking too. It was less buried.
Mhm.
So another couple of pros. Tom noted that it's easier to control your subgrade preparation and placement, for the interior slab. So it'll obviously perform better. You would actually gain space in the basement because you've got a pretty robust, existing fieldstone wall that is, fairly thick. And so with a new wall, even if you put in a 10 or 12 inch wall, you're still gaining some space there. And, new, properly designed and well-constructed walls are going to be better from a water and damp proofing perspective. So there are clearly some significant pros, and it is the sort of gold standard approach, right? It's the best we could do if our goal is to control water, have the best structure, etc. You go to option two, and this approach is to be largely from the interior, reinforcing and adding concrete. So the existing foundation does get to remain in place, which is clearly a benefit. There's no need to lift the house and all that goes along with that from a cost and coordination perspective. The exterior appearance can more or less remain authentic and nothing will look dramatically different. There's no doubt about the fact that this approach is improving and enhancing the structural performance of the wall and the longevity of the wall. And we would have an ability to do some water management on the inside. And it can also be combined with some exterior trenching and drainage design, to minimize how much water we let get into that wall system. Any additional shoring and bracing of the building is not required. And Tom, do you want to speak a little bit to that one?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're gonna raise the whole building, the building mover will probably add some interior braces to walls and things like that. In option one. In option two, you're not raising the building, so that bracing kind of goes away.
Right. Okay. And then, this option compared to the next option, which is really just the repoint and repair, is going to perform better from, a water management perspective inside the building. And then the last option, which is the simplest, is you leave your existing foundation in place and there's no need to lift the house whatsoever. And, the maximum amount of authenticity and material is being, completely maintained both inside and outside. So I'll stop there for a second. Does this help everyone put some parameters and understanding around each one of these options from a pro perspective? Yes, June.
We had sills replaced on the front facade of the building in December 21. When we talk about sill replacement here, does that include the previous work that we just have done?
Well, I think that would be a sill that wouldn't necessarily need to be replaced, provided it's still in good condition and it aligns with what we would need to, tie into. But, my expectation is if there's work that's already been done that's in decent condition and adequate, we wouldn't redo that work unless there was a specific reason to. Tom, would you add anything to that?
Right, that's right. Yeah, there's no need to replace it. It's already been repaired. This would be for other areas, that may not have been repaired yet.
Okay.
Good.
Or that we haven't been able to examine for one reason or another.
Right.
Sure. Exactly. So if we then look at each of these options, I'm trying to make this as large as possible on the screen. So, please tell me if you can't see anything.
That's good.
That help? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
that's good.
So if you start looking at, cons or drawbacks, however you want to label it, the first option, which, we do believe yields a great structural approach, requires lifting the house and supporting the chimney. From the get-go, I believe that the chimney and, what's required to make sure that nothing is disturbed in the upper portions of the house has been a concern of the commission from the get-go, with this option. So I don't want to minimize it. Can it be done effectively? Sure. There are plenty of houses that are lifted and this is not that large of a building. But to me, there is the component, from a preservation perspective, there's demolition and removal of all the historic materials that are underneath the house. I don't think we'd be leaving much in place. I think we'd be lifting the house and clearing things out of the way so that we can have ultimate control over what gets put back. Now, at the same time, as I mentioned up above, and I actually skipped over it, not intentionally, as we take things out, it's not as though we can't find some other creative use for them on site, right? If there are stones in the foundation, they could turn into retaining walls or sitting walls or garden walls. There's the, big questionable, basin that's down there, if it's able to be kept intact, could we do something creative with that and, turn into a fountain or, bird bath on the site? Sure. We could do those creative types of things, but which will be nice as an ongoing story and evolution of Bullard House and its relationship with the town, and, can be celebrated in the museum, but it won't be the authentic house, right? So that's where there's some loss of authenticity. I'm assuming if we do lift it, that we probably will change the exact elevation where it sits, and that will result in some areas where there's some exposed concrete, and we may need to treat that with some sort of veneer, stone, etc. And what we haven't really talked through, and Tom, maybe you have some thoughts on this as well, is so we're lifting the front portion of the house that's under the more conventional foundation. What happens with the back portions? Do they sit in place, or do we lift the entire thing up? And, does this snowball into more of a foundation? And, Tom, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's the whole thing. I mean, if you're going to go through the effort to lift part of the house, you're going to lift all of it. And part of it too is just a logistical thing of how it fits and how they put, when they lift the house, they're going to put steel beams at like a certain spacing underneath the house from front to back or left to right. So you kind of have to get underneath the whole thing to get a jacking point on either side. So I'd be surprised if it was practical to only lift part of the house.
So that's something I think we probably talk through with one of the companies that would lift it. We used Admiral maybe when we were working on the OMIC building down the street. That was simpler. It was one big rectangle, and we didn't have the back portion yet. But anyway, so that would need to be considered. So, the summary of option one is it's likely it's likely the most expensive approach, and it's certainly the best approach for structural longevity of the building. And then we need to reach some sort of consensus on what are our visual goals. You take option two, which is repair with, concrete from the interior, and some of the cons there, that, the interior authenticity in terms of its, being able to be viewed is going to be all or mostly lost, because we are going to cover it up from the inside. Remember, you're not doing that from the exterior. So from the exterior, for what most of the public sees, it wouldn't represent any significant change. And I don't think that there's ever been an effort to consider that we would be letting people down into the basement as part of, the living museum. But it certainly requires, because the house is being left in place and we've all been down to the basement, we know that it's a fairly confined, area. We would be doing work that requires, some real skill and quality control. Is it doable? Absolutely. But that's, something to be considered. It is a repair to something existing. So it is, the quote unquote Band-Aid, and I'm using Tom's term here, that, we're working with what we have, and we're trying to make it better, and we're trying to preserve it the best we can with this approach. That results in losing a little bit of space in the basement because the walls get thicker. Again, we're not really planning to use that space for storage or, for any particular use, other than it being utility space and access, from the bottom to things upstairs. The walls will be damp proof to the interior of the basement, but not the sills. And Tom, do you want to talk to that one a little bit?
And so if we're kind of spraying the inside with concrete, you're sealing that water off kind of from the inside. But as you go up the wall, the outside face of that concrete is going to essentially align with the inside face of the sill.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to try to keep that sill dry by some other means, which is probably grading the dirt away and perhaps some perimeter drainage.
Yeah,
but there's
which
no
I
way
think needs to happen
seal that
anyways.
off the concrete.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that needs to happen anyways, Tom, because when you see the grade relationship to the building on a lot of sides, we would need to improve upon that. And that's why, to me, and it's in the pros list with option 2 is that just because you're doing this work on the interior doesn't mean you can't design a more thoughtful grading and drainage, from the exterior, which I think we should be doing. So as Tom points out, it doesn't completely address all the wall issues. And some masonry work on the interior and exterior, prior to the concrete being replaced is probably needed. And so the summary on this one is it certainly dramatically improves and repairs the foundation with far less disturbance to the existing elements. And it may require some future attention. I threw in the 25 to 50 year period. I don't think we're putting on a 5-year band-aid, but I would anticipate that further in the future, you'd want to inspect and, Tom, do you agree with that time frame, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, that's
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, you're in that time range. It's more of a maintenance issue than option 1 for sure. It's certainly less than option 3.
Right. So option 3, I think that the cons are pretty clear cut in this one. Certainly requires, skill and quality control when you're doing any pointing kind of a job. It's all about the preparation, the materials that are used, the conditions under which you're working. It's really critical that you do it, in the highest quality control way possible. It is absolutely the, Band-Aid approach, especially when compared to option 1, and even more so a Band-Aid approach when compared to option 2. The structural capacity of the existing foundation walls is not being enhanced. It's just being maintained and repaired. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're not gaining some additional benefit as a result of this approach. But it's certainly, a wall that's been holding up the Bullard House for a lot longer than any of us have been here. It is going to require some ongoing maintenance, and it's not going to be completely waterproofing or damp proofing the basement, because it's essentially still the same condition, and having some dehumidification and some added drainage intentionally in there is really a strong recommendation relative to maintaining the building in the best way possible anyways. So the summary being, it really is the repair option, but it's where the historic materials are left exposed and in place, in and out, and that ongoing repairs are just inevitable. So those are the 3 in a nutshell, and with some thoughtful pros, cons, and summary for each. We threw on here just the note that on any option you select, we're talking specifically about the exterior wall. There's still going to be work inside of that wall to some of the framing upstairs, putting in a footing or 2 or 3, getting some additional bracing inside. That's just, it's a given, with any one of these options. And we all knew that. And then I'll also remind the commission that, from the get-go, we've discussed the fact that, we want to do right and be good stewards to this property. We obviously want to be, financially and fiscally responsible in doing so, but we were not overly concerned with quote unquote, a perfect preservation effort in the areas where our visitors and community are going to be, not visiting, right?
Right.
So with that, I have my opinion, on what feels right for you folks and Bullard House and, the objectives at hand, but I want to hear from all of you what your thoughts are. and make sure while we have Tom here, that specific questions can get answered, relative to how we would approach any one of these options and what his thoughts are. June, you start, please.
I just have a kind of a silly technical question. In, putting this up against our grant application, the word the word that is used is rehabilitation.
Mhm.
In the grant lexicon, I don't think they like the word repair. And so my question is, can all of this be, can these three options be considered rehabilitation in terms of the Department of the Interior standards that we have to, observe?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, June. From my perspective, and others please chime in on this as well. From my perspective, all of what we're doing is to rehab Bullard House and to give it a new life that will be lasting and meaningful for the community. This particular chart that we're looking at is specific to how are we addressing the foundation to be supporting that rehabilitation.
Okay.
So I don't want to, I think when we're putting together grant applications, we're not going to be digging into this level of detail. Okay. It may be that, part of the work that we're doing on the building is to address the foundation appropriately. But I don't think we need to be digging into the level of detail that we're getting at here today. I think it's just one portion and one piece of the greater whole, which is a rehab of the building.
Okay.
Giving it new life. Do others feel differently?
That
Along the
makes
line,
sense to me.
go ahead. Did somebody else try to speak?
I was, but it wasn't in response to this question, so you go first.
Okay. The other piece in the pie is, of course, we have to in order to get the grant, even to apply for the grant, we have to execute an easement to the Massachusetts Historical Commission, a preservation easement for the building, restriction in perpetuity. And that's my other question is, we have an impression that that would really limit what can be done to the house, and that they would stick their nose into all kinds of things that we might wish to do at one point or another. I get the idea that probably, for instance, would they be happy with any of these if they decided to be?
Well, Barry, a lot of that hinges upon it at which time you're actually, commencing a preservation restriction, right? Because,
Yeah.
right, the preservation restriction will begin at a specific point in time and then move forward.
Mhm.
Perhaps it's beginning after we've already addressed these repairs, and what we have existing is existing.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at it responsibly now for what we end up with. But, we all know that the framing within the building has already been modified, right? There are
Mhm.
portions of the building that have some authentic framing and materials. There are portions that do not, right? So
That's correct.
that's already been a modification to the, in the preservation world, to what was there. Now,
They can't force you to go back.
correct. So, I don't know, we have not yet, gone through the absolute ins and outs of, when an application goes in for a grant and when we would need to actually start that preservation restriction. But to me, that's, perhaps part of the decision-making process to do that.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in Tom's and my mind that if the objective is to put underneath Bullard House the best foundation that we can put that will last the longest. Option one is the clear winner. Is that the best thing for the town? And, you know, measuring some of the other objectives that go into this, because it's unfortunately not black and white.
Thank you.
Yeah, Janet,
Yeah, well, I had a couple of things. They're not too long, I don't think. One is in terms of maintaining some restoration and rehabilitation so that we can get money, state monies, and maybe some other ones. We don't know at this point which part of the project we're going to be on. There's only a certain 6 months or so or 8 months in which we can actually be working on the thing that they're going to pay us for. So we don't know if the foundation is even going to be, maybe we're going to have to do that too soon, and we'll have to use that money for some other thing besides the foundation in order to qualify for the grant to pay for it. So anyway, there's that little timing thing that we're always wrestling with. But I just want to throw that in there. And the thing that I think I'm most interested in as a person who knows nothing about this type of construction is the water. I feel like we keep coming back to the water and the damage that the water can do. And if the water really is a key player in this, somehow controlling the moisture in the water, I'm more concerned about doing a really good job with that. And if that means jacking the house up, well, I probably want to reconsider it then. But if there are, we might, you know, we're gonna up this a tiny bit to something that may cost you a little bit more, but it should work better for the water, maybe short of what number one would cost us. Does this make any sense what I'm saying? Can you talk about the water?
It does. And, you know, I'll give you my first response, and then, you know, Tom, you add to it, please. On any foundation, when we're trying to control water, it's always best done on the exterior. It's to keep the water away from the foundation in the first place, right? It's not the optimal to allow the water to come in and then deal with it from the interior. It does get done sometimes that way because that's what you have to do. I feel strongly that on any one of these three approaches, the best line of defense for the future of the building is for us to be controlling our surface runoff drainage, you know, that happens after any rainstorm, after, you know, any, you know, spring thaw, et cetera, you know, to get things away from the building on the surface, and also to go down as much as we reasonably can to capture that water before it has an opportunity to seep into any foundation wall, whether it be concrete or stone, and carry it away from the building, right? That is not, however, you know, a way that you can always capture water that may be coming from the ground up, and that's, you know, a slightly different system. But, you know, to me, that's the best line of defense to begin with. And on any one of these three options, I think we should look at exterior grading and trying to get some perimeter drain system in. So I'll stop there. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just a couple comments. One is, as far as the historic thing goes, we've done other schools. We just did a school in Belmont, New Hampshire that had federal tax, or I don't think it was, I guess it was federal funding, that was administered, interestingly enough, by the Park Service. I guess they're in charge of that a lot.
Yep.
And that had an existing brick foundation, and they were very concerned with preserving that. That building got moved on from the existing brick foundation onto a new concrete foundation on a different lot down a steep grade, which was interesting. But if you ever just look up Gale School, Belmont, New Hampshire, and you can find all sorts of pictures. But on that one, they actually cut the existing bricks in half and used them as veneer on the outside.
It was pretty labor intensive and committed effort.
Right. Yep. Agreed. So there's that. And then the other comment too is keep in mind that the first option, a lot of the labor might be able to be done with small machinery. The other two options, it's all hand labor. So even though it may appear, it may be worth considering, we're talking to some contractors and getting some ideas of cost on more than one option. Because it may appear that one is more expensive than the other, and it may in fact be more expensive, but it may not be as much more as you'd think. But none of us can really answer that question right now. I can't answer it. I don't think Dan can answer it. It's really takes some estimating.
Right,
Um,
but I also wouldn't want the commission to not be heading towards the approach that they feel is the best for the building because of cost being the only factor. Right, it's not that large of a building. And I don't think that, I'm hoping that we're not going to be in a situation where, any one of these approaches is considered a prohibitive cost. It, may come out to be something more than what we would like. But, I'd also like to feel as though we're doing right by the building in the town and not, compromising on anything without a justifiable reason. So, but from the water perspective, Tom, do you agree that, best it's dealt with from before it's allowed to get in?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
You want to keep the water out.
Right.
Once it's in, then you've got to deal with even more things, especially even on this building, the second option, the water's going to kind of come in some, but it's still going to be there and a little tougher to deal with. It still can freeze and thaw and all that sort of stuff in between the stones, which it's probably doing now. But yeah, it's just not as durable a solution.
Right. So I'd like to hear from the commission members, if any of you have already formulated in your own mind of what you think is the best way to go between these three options, as well as if you have any specific questions about any one option, from Tom, from an engineering and support perspective.
I'd like to talk a little bit about water and my experience over the past 25 years dealing with the building. When we first got the building, we weren't having trouble with water getting in a big way. And one of the things we had to do was connect it to the town hall next door for water supply for the for the running water and so forth. And we dug across from one building to the other and found that there were those foundation walls that extend 13 feet out toward the town hall and underground, and they put the new water line in through that area. But in the process of all of that and digging it up and refilling that trench, they put in material that was a little bit toward clay, so that if they had to dig it up again, it would be easy. And out of that, and with the way the grading is on the lawn next between the house and the driveway, at certain moments when you have a great cloudburst, you have water pool in the lawn out there, and it found that new material a perfect way to go down into the ground and end up in the cellar. And so since that got done, on the rare occasions you have tremendous cloudbursts, we've had that happen. And that's when most of the water that gets in the cellar that we know about comes in. So it's my view that, for instance, if we did option 3, which would be great for keeping the what you can see of the foundation and everything in kind of original way, I would actually want to use option 2 in that one small area where that water has been coming in. So because that particular part of the wall is not well constructed anyway. And if it were sealed up with some concrete on the inside in that one little corner, it would do an awful lot for proofing us from water problems what water problems we've known about specifically in the past. That small area would really benefit from that. And then secondly, as Dan has already pointed out, better grading outside would eliminate most of that anyway. So I think that that's one thing that has entered my head in terms of control of water, if we went with option 3. I think that, I mean, obviously, I really like the fact that you still have your old stone walls showing in most of the area and all that. That's kind of good. But it also, you know, it doesn't eliminate the possibility of leaks and other things in the future by any means. But I do want to make sure that the grading outside will make a lot of difference in probably 2 or 3 different areas of the house when we finally come up with, you know, final solutions in that regard.
So Barry, is your vote leaning towards option 3, but with some isolated interior concrete work where needed, coupled with exterior drainage and grading?
I could say that I would lean in that direction, yeah.
Okay. Okay. How about others? Go ahead, June.
Not having the long experience that Barry has had, and you know, the experience of observing, you know, I'm taking his comments just as they are. I'm not concerned with having the basement, you know, the fieldstone walls in the basement look the same. That's not a big priority for me. So I would feel more secure with option 2.
Okay. Janet, Ellie?
I guess my concern is having to revisit this repeatedly. And I think that's why I really am not in support of number 3, because it sounds like we're constantly going to be battling repairs. And I don't think that's, I don't want to have the commission focusing all of its time on repairing the building. I think we want to make it useful and have it be sustainable. And so I too am more supportive of 2 or even 1.
Okay.
Am I remembering correctly that you said that the outside of number 2 could have the stones?
Well, option 2 is retaining the existing stone,
Yes.
so it would stay on the outside.
And
Yeah,
then, and that's where that Shot Creek stuff comes in.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
which is done primarily with reinforcing and on the interior. As Tom pointed out, you know, there may be some select areas where you're doing a little bit of pointing before you do that anyways, because you're making sure that before you pour up against it, that you're addressing a specific issue. But yes, the idea is that in option 2 or in option 3, what's on the outside now is what stays on the outside. And I'm going to point out that if we're doing our job properly with regrading to enhance drainage on the exterior of the building, as well as protecting our sills and our siding, we will be excavating to gain a little bit more exposure of the foundation, whether it's existing or new, to do that. right? Right now, there are areas where you see the grade right up against the building. We want to avoid that moving forward in the future. There are going to be isolated areas, especially when you're creating an accessible entrance door, for instance. You have to build up in order to make that happen, right? You can't have a step for a wheelchair to go over. But those are just, a very isolated condition. So option 2 and 3 is keeping stone on the exterior of the building the way that it is today. Option 1 provides the opportunity to add stone for aesthetic purposes, but it'll have to be thin because, Tom's going to want to line up his foundation, a concrete foundation wall, with the framing upstairs in the building. And then you would be adding to the outside of that stone. So you can only bridge that, the space where the veneer stone and the concrete, with the structure up above. And, sometimes when this is done on buildings and not done well, you end up creating a little shelf condition, and then you see the stone beyond that. And that's why I think in the building that Tom mentioned in New Hampshire, the school, they cut the brick into thinner pieces so that they wouldn't have that condition, to look awkward. So that was a long answer to your question, Janet, but trying to be accurate.
I have this metaphor in my head. I don't deal with foundations, but I do sew. And they always say, don't put a good patch on an old worn knee of dungarees or something. And I'm kind of seeing that a little bit here too. We don't want to we don't want to leave so much that's not in great condition, so that the good stuff we do isn't going to matter. It's
yeah, and it's not easy with it. It's not easy with an old building. It just isn't.
So I had a question.
Go ahead.
Did you want to say more about that? I don't know why I brought that metaphor up.
No. Go ahead, please.
Well, my other question is, we've talked about kind of how long number 2 might last. How long might number 1 last before that one has to be redone?
Tom, you want to speak to that?
There are concrete foundations that are really old that are still performing well. My parents' house was built in the 40s. It has a concrete foundation. It's in great shape.
Now, this is number 1 we're talking about, but
Right.
that's
Right. So,
okay.
I mean, essentially, you've got a concrete foundation at that point. So the concrete is going to be durable and have quite a bit of longevity. Substantially longer than the other 2, I would say. At least double.
like 100 years, or
I don't see why not.
Yeah, presumably
as
that
long
and
as we're
beyond,
not-
if it's done right.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's good concrete and the rebar is put in the right spot, and you're not putting bags and bags of salt on it over and over again to promote freeze thaw, that's really the only damage that you typically get to concrete. And even if there are some areas where you have to put a lot of salt down, you can seal it and preserve that. So there's concrete and subway systems that are easily 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
That are still performing fine.
I think that I've been leaning all along toward number 2, but with the option of saying, gee, we need to do some more excavating here and get more of that clay out or something, so that it's not just a pure number 2. If we find something that we might want to add to the project like that, I mean, if we don't do any excavating at all, it seems like we're not going to help with the drainage, and I don't know if that's doable, or if you kind of have to pick one of these 3.
Right. Well, I mean, listen, there's always the option of do nothing, right? And I think we're starting from a place of suggesting that that's not the option that we should be even considering, right? I guess, Tom, and not to put you on the spot here, you've been down there, you've looked at the condition. I know that we've already talked about the fact at some point in time we'll start needing to evaluate the actual framing for the use that we have and, what should and shouldn't be repaired. Do you feel, if you put aside option one at the moment, which we know is the gold standard option in terms of structure and stability, right? And longevity. That's a given. Do you feel as though option two could represent still a very responsible approach for the building that is addressing in a reasonable way the areas that need to be repaired or enhanced?
Yeah, I would say the caveat to that is it's not without some handwork on the inside of that basement to clean up some of those walls before it's done. There's some areas that need a little bit of attention and repairs. And then there's the area, I think there's an area around where there used to be an existing stair or opening or something that's kind of like a pile of rocks. All that sort of stuff still needs to get cleaned up.
Right.
But if all of that's cleaned up, then essentially that concrete wall is going to perform that's going to be doing all the work as far as like retaining the soil and trying to keep some of the water back. Like I said before,
and it's holding together what's there, right?
Right. And I suppose you could do like an option kind of 2A too, if grading became somewhat of a problem, where you raise the building up, say 8 inches or something like that, and add a little bit of concrete on top of the wall to help with keeping rot and insects away from the foundation. And it's probably an option too. Obviously that comes with other issues and cost and aesthetics and everything else. But yeah, no, I think option 2 will accomplish what we need to. But it still doesn't really repair anything on the outside face of the wall. So you're still going to have to repoint that outside face of the wall, and then continue to do that from time to time. It's still going to move. It's not like a brand new concrete wall, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Right. But as I said earlier, my strong recommendation would be that in any one of these options, you're doing something intentional on the exterior in terms of grading and drainage to improve upon what we have today. Right.
Yeah.
So
I guess another thing to think about too is not all of the building has this stone wall around it, right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
So there's some areas where it's wood foundation wall, so to speak, and then some intermediate helical piles. So, that's not the most durable solution either, and that'll need to be addressed at some point too.
right, except for option 2 or 3 lets you leave those things in place, right?
Yeah, 2 or 3, and it continues to be a maintenance item.
So, and you did recommend, if I'm remembering correctly, that regardless of the scenario, 1, 2, or 3 for the front portion of the house, that you would still recommend putting in a slab and or at least some gravel and some, poly in the back portion anyways, just to protect that, as well as some other, finishes that have been put into place. So in order to not keep Tom any longer than necessary, is there any other questions for him on these options? Yep, go ahead, June.
Just with option 2, if the exterior stone is maintained properly over the years, it won't affect the durability of the inside concrete.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the concrete can take the moisture if it got through anyways. It's just a concern about the moisture and the water being inside and in between those stones and freezing and thawing and causing trouble that way with wicking. into the sill plate as well.
Okay, thank you.
Tom,
will-
Tom, well, go ahead, Barry, please.
I will say that I'm not happy with the idea of lifting the house for a variety of reasons, and the business with the chimney and all that, and the fact that the whole thing grew like Topsy in 4 or 5 different pieces over the years. I just, it's not a good, it wasn't ever a good structural unit as a whole anyway. And therefore I'm somewhat concerned about that. And I'm very concerned about that. I really don't have any problem getting behind option 2
Mhm.
if we want to do that.
If we wanted to further push the evaluation, the responsible evaluation of an option 2, Tom, do you have some folks that you might recommend that we talk to about pricing and, who would be able to take on a project like this? Because it does require some skill and, as I mentioned before, quality control. And I would want them to be working on, under your guidance. So.
Sure. Yeah, no, we worked with a contractor with you guys on a project not too long ago, Dan, that did something somewhat similar to option 2.
Okay.
It was more in a crawl space at a church in Boxborough, but.
Oh gosh, yeah, I remember. Yeah.
But that contractor may have a good sense of, they may have a better sense, I should say, of cost and impact on something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe that's a reasonable next step if everyone's in agreement that we could connect with that company and have them come and look at this relative to an option 2 approach. That makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else for Tom? And then we'll let him peel off. Seems like no. Okay. Tom, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for going out there, for putting together the letter, and let's connect offline and figure out how to pull this person in that was at the Boxborough. I remember UCC Church, somebody Greenleaf brought in, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I talked to Greenleaf first, and then
Okay.
from there. But,
Okay. Good. Let's try for that. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thank
sounds
you,
good.
Tom.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
You bet. You too. So how long did you schedule the meeting for, June? How's everyone's time?
They give us till 1, but I'm not sure they would actually cut us off at 1.
Yeah, it's okay. I can't go till 1 anyways, but I can go
Okay.
to 12:30, no problem.
Okay.
So I think this is something you all can continue to discuss and think about. I feel as though it's not unreasonable to dig in a bit further on option 2 from a cost and constructability perspective before anyone makes any decision, right? And Barry, it was exactly the concerns about lifting the house and what that would mean and what it might disturb that led me personally to wanting to favor option 2. But at the same time, this is a decision the commission's got to make, and it's got to be the right decision for the long term. But it's as I said, it's not an absolute black and white, right?
No.
It's really a balancing of the objectives in a way that feels right. But from a pure preservation perspective, option 3 would be the direction that you would go in if you're trying to be as purist as possible. But it has an element of requiring the ongoing maintenance, which any old house does. So you try to see if there's a balance, right? So anyways, I will, right after we're done today, send this chart out to you, which, like as I said, Tom and I over the last couple of days put it together because we thought it would be useful to put onto paper what, is pros and cons, and you all add to it, modify it, as you see fit. But I think it was a good exercise.
I
And
think it's
taking-
very, very helpful,
Mm,
very, very
Yeah.
helpful to have
Yeah.
it put in this form.
So, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time because we have not regrouped to discuss the plan that we threw out last time, which was conceptual. And which, by the way, let me see if I can move. Look at that, I can. Okay. We, last time we met had talked about a potential site plan. We also talked about, a layout within Bullard House itself as to how, in my mind's eye, it could work as a museum or where you'd enter the building, but we didn't really reach any consensus. And I don't know if you've all had a chance amongst yourselves to talk about it, but I have a couple of questions to see if there's some closure on. I guess question number one is how everyone felt about this idea that the main public accessible entrance into the building was actually on the back side and not that door that faces Old Town Hall. So that's my question number one. Is that one that people could rally around or that people have concerns with?
I have real concerns with it for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
And one of them has been my experience with snow over the last 25 years. That lean-to section, the back of the house, snow and ice, and it's just an awful place to deal with in terms of removal and cleanup and all that. I've just been out in there and, almost waist deep in snow, and
Mhm.
it's just an awful place to try to keep clean and be the way that you have people come and go.
Yeah,
Um,
my only comment to that one though, Barry, is that that's without having a built hard surface walkway at appropriate pitches that
Oh, yeah.
comes right up to the door, right?
Oh, yeah, I
Okay.
understand that. But that's been a real concern for me, and I also don't like the fact that you just can't at all see from the street where you're going into the place.
Mhm.
The other thing that I haven't discussed this, and I really need to with some public safety people in the town, but that location for a parking space for,
Okay, yeah, and we're going to get to
Handicap.
that one.
it's gonna be a
Hold that
big
thought
thing
for-
with that, yeah.
Yeah, hold that thought for a moment because I want to bring that one back up. But others in terms of the entrance location for the building? Go ahead, Jude, please.
I like the idea of the rear entrance. My experience with visiting other museums is that often you just do not enter from the street side. You're redirected with signage. So that isn't an obstacle for me at all. But I think, we need two good ways to get in and out. And to me, that's the rear and the existing accessible entrance that we have.
Right, the one that's not right on this side.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, others? Janet, Ellie?
Natalie, you go first if you have something.
Well, I guess I don't have strong objections to having it enter in the rear. I think like June, that I think we have ways to work around that, and using that back room, I think we hadn't really. We talked about using it as a staging area, as a kind of, but using it as kind of a communal entryway might work work as well. So I don't really have any objections to having it in the back.
Okay, thank you. Janet?
I think I'll look at the inside. I really liked that whole notion of the wooden pegs and the
Yeah.
place to hang your coat and a real entryway. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to be spending more and more time with your idea of synergy with all these other buildings in town. We're talking a lot about that. And so I almost see this as like, this is where you'll pick up your flyer on the history of the town. And so I like that. And I think making that the entrance allows us to use the other big room that would be the side entrance, the secondary entrance. When you look at it, it just cries out to be an exhibit hall compared to any other place in the place. So that's one thing I like about it.
I can tell you that my vision when you walk, regardless of where we do this, my vision was that one of the entrance features was a display on a wall that actually had a map of, maybe it's the village, center of the town, but that had, the photograph and the history of the different things that were available and related to community and the evolution of the town. And then, it would dig in a bit more about Bullard House but that was part of just always an entrance feature, tied to, but anyways, I get ahead of myself. I asked you about the rear entrance for a specific reason. You all know that I was proposing something, not necessarily to make it in the back, but my strong feeling was that the location where it was planned on the right side of the building where the big red arrow is, wasn't the right location relative to, parking and access because of the hill and the proximity of the driveway to Old Town Hall. So I was trying to come up with something that, was perhaps an improvement over that. But if there's an idea that we liked using this back portion of the building that I'm going to, make a color at the moment. Green's not the best one. We'll make it purple. Using that area as an quote unquote, entrance vestibule, area, we could also explore that door that's in the front of the building now today, but faces the street, could be considered the entrance, and then we would need to think about a pathway getting to it from an accessibility portion, right? So that might be another alternative that still keeps the same interior flow and has something facing the street, or perhaps you look at it from both sides. The reason I didn't propose that at the get-go was my personal objective. It may not be your objective. My objective to minimize change to the house from the very public side, from an aesthetic perspective. But that may not be the objective that you're all as concerned with. So I'm just going to drop that and let it simmer for a bit to think through. And I want to now just turn our attention to the parking. And by the way, I appreciate and thank you everyone for your answers. And Barry, I respect your concerns in the back of the building. If we did this in the back of the building with an entrance, I agree that we need to redirect appropriately from a design perspective, signage, et cetera, from the front and side so that you get back there. And we would need to make sure that snow and ice and maintenance is not an issue. It should be designed to be maintainable, right? Doesn't mean that somebody may not have to go further with the snow blower or the shovel, but we should design it appropriately. But I do want to talk about parking because I proposed something that was dramatically different than what was proposed before, but that's what you're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to be pushing the envelope
absolutely.
and thinking things through. I'm going to tell you that I too, when I was thinking through it myself and recognizing, maybe we have to get rid of a telephone pole or move a telephone pole, we could work around it, change the angle, whatever. I too was concerned about, well, do I really want to back out into the main road? Do I, what's this going to be like? And what I kept on coming back to is, how often is it really going to be used? And is it any worse than the driveway that's, literally 6 feet over to the left of it? Right? Which I think that one might even be worse. So that's something you all have to determine whether that's, acceptable, usable, et cetera. I thought it was a great location to right up front, show that there's accessible parking. And I thought it was great in terms of, immediately getting to a walkway to service the building, if there's an event, a caterer, what have you. But I wasn't trying to minimize or pull off the table the potential thinking that Old Town Hall and Bullard House are part of a single campus. And if there could be accessible parking somewhere up where my big yellow dot is, do we revisit the idea of a meandering, accessible pathway from up there? I'm not opposed to looking at that. You all have to grapple with, at what time are events happening here and at Old Town Hall? Would there be some sort of a conflict there? You're really going up the Old Town Hall driveway to get, something that's accessible to Bullard. Is it, is that clear? Does that work? But and maybe there's more than one place. Maybe there is something down where B is, but there's also up where A is. Accessible parking in a route. And that's how we're maximizing, flexibility and an ability to come from two different directions. But I just throw it out there because we're not going to get anywhere unless we make, some move in a direction and then start, ironing out all of the particulars. The septic being one of them, and I want to come back to that too. So any other thoughts or comments on that? Are you glad I'm bringing it up, or would you rather me not?
No, I'm glad you did. And I'm going to throw a third one in there, which is probably ridiculous. If we were to use the entrance that's already there on the side where the red arrow, this applies to any one of these options. I'm going to say, I've been talking a lot with Lucy, who is our new member who wasn't able to make it today. And she is hot to trot to do some landscaping that will be historic, but also will control the focus of what people look at out there. And so we were thinking that having a border of something that separates us just a little bit, it might be a hedge, it might be a tree, from the house right on top of us next door, and not putting a parking lot there, but putting a screen of sorts, so that the Bullard House has its own space. So that would then move it away from B. So then I said, well, if you're going to start screening things, you could use the north side there, the red arrow, which may be ridiculous, I admit it, but you could use the red arrow there and screen that pathway and have your parking space behind that. And I just thought, well, we've got to look at all of that stuff together.
Yeah. So I can tell you, Janet, that where the red arrow is, I don't think that you get a reasonable accessible parking space there. And you also only ever get one. And it's not a great one because of the angle that it's at and the change in the elevation. And that was why I was moving away from there.
Yeah. Just thought I better throw it in there.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And I'm giving you my opinion. I do think that there is an opportunity down here.
We got two red arrows.
Yeah, I'm getting rid of this one.
Okay.
Yeah. I do think there's an opportunity to combine something from an accessible parking area along with a buffer where my orange oval is to accomplish what you were talking about. It may not be as significant as perhaps what you and Lucy were talking about, and there may be some compromise there. And it can also be a very nice fence with plantings along it that provides buffer. My only comment would be that if we were to create I had, essentially two spaces down there. There was a space plus the access, but when it
Mhm.
wasn't being needed for accessibility and it was being used just to service the building or maintain the building, I thought you could put two vehicles down there. You just want to make sure that you always have room to open up a car or a van door without bumping into something. So that would be my one, caveat if you're designing a buffer along with, some parking space. But I am concerned that the amount of space on the right side of the building and the change in elevation is challenging for creating a good viable parking space. I think there's going to be a couple of retaining walls, and I think that you're going to end up with a nose or a tailgate of a vehicle really uncomfortably close to
Mhm.
where other people who are not using the parking space are coming in and out of the building.
I accept that. I will
So,
not fight for it.
yeah. Other thoughts and comments on this one? I'm asking it because I'm trying to figure out if we should, dig in a little bit more and start getting into some of the details of, A and B, or is there a C? And with your comment, Shannon, and what you talked about with Lucy, I'm seeing that maybe there's a B2, so to speak,
Mhm.
that tries to get, more border there on the left-hand side where the orange oval is, and, shift some things around it a little bit. And I think that's certainly doable.
I think the concern about backing out has been greater amongst us than it feels like here today. Because if you stand there, you really are backing out into Route 62. And
Mhm.
one of the biggest problems that the town is taking up right now with the Central Mass Regional Planning is how do we deal with safety in
Mhm.
on that curve and in that area? And for us to add that, I think would bring sort of surprise that people would think that could work
Mhm.
safety wise. And it might be worth it to talk to the police chief and just say, give us some kind of a feeling about this.
Mhm.
Do you think
That's
this could
great.
work? Yeah,
Great comment,
I'd volunteer to do that. Yeah.
and
I-
also, is there a zone up here that I'm going to make bright yellow at the moment? Is there a zone there that actually gets added to the grade outside the new storage building and, the upper parking area, so that we have more space up there
We've
at a
put
higher
that,
elevation?
we've
What's
put
that?
that, we have put that plan in the Dropbox, I believe, that we had, that was drafted with the town hall edition.
Correct, which was our
elevator edition.
original sketch.
Yeah, and that is, if we were to get the town to implement that, it would help us. One of the problems that they have over there that they don't understand is that the existing parking, such as it is there, will not pass the architectural access board because it's not paved.
No, it's not paved, it's not
It's
designated.
Well, it is designated, but it's not paved, and
Mhm.
I mean, the spaces aren't drawn or anything like that.
Correct.
But and therefore the town hall is not accessible as it sits there right now,
Yeah.
according to the regs.
Yeah, and
And-
when I said designated, Barry, what I'm being clear about, just to
Yeah.
be clear, it's that you have an accessible parking space plus a loading zone.
Yeah,
There's nothing up there
I know.
that makes it so that if somebody pulls into
No.
the accessible parking space,
Yeah.
that loading zone is being maintained,
no,
which is what makes the accessible space the accessible space.
that's right. But if that were, I mean, the town hall actually needs that done for the town hall.
I would
And
agree.
we had that designed with the ramp to come down to the Bullet House so that that would serve both parties.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm bringing this up now because I don't want to march down a road it's not making sense to the commission, in terms of design of the site. And I think design of the site's important, because we really want to start getting into the details. Where are their walls? What are the pathways? How are we getting in and out of the building? How does the grade work? And I want to be able, once Ross finishes their survey, to really start getting these things figured out. And I don't want to be going down a road that's not making any sense. And, again, we'll always have to consider the cost, but I believe that once the survey is done, I'd like to be able to revise a concept for the site. And then I'd like to be able to pull Ross into helping us understand what does that mean from an engineering perspective. Now, parking area B also has, the added coordination needed with your septic system. So that's going to be a factor no matter what, right? That we got to look into. So, that analysis, as part of their scope, they recommended a Title V inspection, and it seems like that's in the process of getting scheduled so that it could happen. Is that right? Well, June, I think you're muted.
I don't think we've acted on it, but we certainly are getting ready for that. Yeah.
Okay.
I
good.
think it's just a matter of timing with Ross so that they can locate the features for, when the Title V inspector is there.
Right. Yeah. So as I remember it, what Ross wants the town to do is schedule the Title V and then give Ross the
Okay.
date so that they
Okay.
can be there and be in observance. And maybe that will, hopefully
Then that
happen,
will
yes,
happen. Yes.
sooner rather than later. So
Of course, we had a
I'm-
Title V done when we bought the place.
right.
That-
and-
Done at that time. So, I mean, it's just a matter of doing that. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be a problem otherwise.
right,
I can work to coordinate that.
Okay. And did everyone get a little chuckle out of the fact that while we were going back and forth with Ross, that they uncovered a plan that was done for this septic system literally in the first couple weeks that Ross was a company?
Yes, that was.
I thought that was great.
I actually had a copy of that plan from the Board of Health that
Previously.
may not have been in the Dropbox early on, but
Okay, see, I don't remember seeing that one in there when I looked originally, but I could have missed it too.
well, I
So-
found I had help from Bill Brookings, who's
Yeah.
our Neshoba Board of Health person, and
Yeah.
because he's the one that suggested to me that we look at the abutter, and
Yeah.
there it was.
Yeah. So if the area up in yellow, my wedge and my circle, if there was a way to develop the parking up there where we, maximize the layout and maneuverability, and we created, we revisit this idea of an accessible pathway to Bullard House, would that be the preferred approach with the commission?
I prefer that approach if it's all doable.
Okay.
I do too.
I definitely prefer that.
Okay, so I think that that's what we should continue to evaluate, which then puts that much more, importance on making sure that we get good survey information back there of what exists today. And, potentially, and I'd say potentially, is that also keeping that kind of regrading and effort a little bit further away from our septic system?
Oh, definitely.
Right. And it does not mean that we have to eliminate having a pedestrian connection from the front side of the Bullard House out towards the back.
No.
Right. So,
Right.
no.
okay. All right, good.
I mean, one of the things that I've developed as a result of your look at the spaces in the back of the house, and I've talked about using the annex, the piece that goes across at the left of the back as back, back of the house stuff. One of the things we have to do is maximize the use of the first floor, which is the accessible area.
Right.
And therefore, any back of the house stuff needs to move upstairs. We need to use rooms upstairs for that rather than downstairs. Downstairs needs to be all public space. simply because we have so little of it to use. We've got to use it all.
Yep.
And one of the things that has been attractive to me as an idea is that entrance door that that's near your B parking space, the existing one, might be a way that you take like a school group in.
Yeah,
Have them come in there, because then they can put their stuff in that area. And if they have lunches or something, you can have it in that area. And that I just see that as an obvious big change. And secondly, it would be a great area for demonstration purposes when you want to do demonstrations for folks. So that the whole point of having somebody look at this and take a different look will change views of people on a lot of things that they hadn't thought of before. And that's just why you want a different idea.
right. And Barry, perhaps you're coming into that back section from both sides.
Yeah.
And even if the front door isn't the one that's, specifically designed as the accessible entrance, it's a door that can also be left open, and you'll know that from the front of the building that there's something going on in there. You're getting light and air into that space. My vision was that back portion not only served as an entry, it also served as a gathering place. It's a place where the commission can go and have their meeting around that island, or some other project that people are working on. It was intended to be a flexible, open space that also had places to store coats and a display that's welcoming, a bathroom, etc. And it lets you leave the rest of Bullard House for its mission, which might have some permanent display, and it may be changing all the time, but that back portion would be the constant, to allow for gracious and welcoming use. So, well, with that, it's 12:30 and I'm going to need to pop off. So I think we accomplished something today. I'm going to follow up with sending the comparison of those options. June, I'll just send it to you, and then you can disseminate around. And I think a couple of action items, if you all can just follow up and on the Title V thing to make sure that that's happening. And once it's scheduled, that's great that we get a date that we get to push Ross out there.
Okay.
Which I think will be good. June, I hope you didn't mind my chiming in on the signing off on Ross's proposal the other day to try to make it simpler and more efficient.
It was good. I didn't want to ruffle our town admin's worries. That was.
But
good.
that's why with it coming from me as a question, but you all do what you got to do. Hopefully was a good approach.
No, it worked fine.
Okay. And you all continue to talk through some of these other issues amongst yourselves, but I feel as though we're pushing forward
Yes.
to try to get some answers. And then I will follow up with Tom in order to schedule getting this contractor to come out and talk to us about the realities of doing option B or
Absolutely.
2, I should say, and what does that mean? How would that play out, and et cetera. And we'll dig in. So, and we certainly don't have to commit to any of that at the moment,
Okay.
other than
Thank you very
getting more
much.
information.
Yeah.
What's that?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, we're all saying thank you at the same time.
Okay. All right. Well, good to see you all. Take care.
Nice to see you too. We've missed you.
Thanks. Likewise. Take care.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good
Bye.
weekend, Dan.
You as well. Good long weekend. Bye.
Bye-bye now. Okay. I think we accomplished a great deal.
Yes.
Uh,
Hard thinking.
Yeah,
But
but
we
it was very nice the way they outlined it. It's to give you the pros and cons of all the options. I think that was very useful.
Very well organized.
They're pros, right? We're the doobies. They're the pros.
Yeah,
But remember-
it's hard decisions. They're hard decisions.
Remember, we have to live with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, that's,
The pros are the pros, but we have to live with it. So
Yeah.
that's the piece you work through with all of that.
yeah,
Don't let the pros completely take over the thinking, because otherwise, when you have to live with it later, it may or may not work well for you. But you're absolutely right. And the fact that you have different, it's like that parking space down in the front corner of the property. It's a lovely idea, and it would be an excellent idea if it wasn't Route 62. But, oh my God, the people next door have a similar driveway, and theirs could be worse. He's right.
Yeah, but that's
Most
a
of the
private
people-
one, right? And we're talking
that-
about public use, which I don't think we want to
And
go
that's the
there.
whole point. And
Mhm.
that's the whole point. The people next door, most of their coming and going is the people who live there, and they learn how to manage the situation
Mhm.
safely. When you have visitors coming who may not even be familiar with the town, and they come and use a parking space, they don't have a clue of what they're backing out into.
This
And
is a good point.
that's why I just can't see that. Anyway,
Yeah, and Janet, to your point, I think one of the biggest issues that the town is having right now is the traffic flow in the
Mhm.
center of town, and adding to the problem is not gonna to win any battles, right?
no,
Right, right.
no. I haven't gone to the point of talking to the other people, but I need to talk to Freddie and the police chief, and we need to talk to a couple of them about it, because they could make a statement on the subject that would take care of the problem, eliminate it, because I see it as a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, it's not safe. I don't want to see anybody get hurt.
Well, what do you
No.
think, we need to do on our own to orchestrate interest in finishing the accessible parking next to the town hall?
Well, do we have to work with somebody else who's going to also be using that parking?
Yep,
And that would be who?
well, I mean, Sandra is the town hall manager, and to me, she would be the first for that aspect. She might be the first person to talk to, and then she would know who else to include.
And then the accessibility question about the slope and, can we actually do this? Can we actually build something that, a roadway that meets all those requirements, as well as isn't going to cost us a fortune to restructure the the underpinnings of it, the driveway.
I mean, rebuilding, finishing that thing could be $100,000.
Yeah.
But the point, I mean, and we put that in the ARPA funds, the money from the COVID money that came to the town, that $400,000 that they've got sitting there, and they've spent a little of it, but they haven't spent a lot of it. There's still a lot of it they haven't spent. And we did get this into that list, and have repeatedly pressed that, and we need to see who else we could get that might help us with that. Unfortunately, there's nobody right now that's advocating handicapped access in the town as a whole. I mean, we don't have the ADA committee anymore, and we don't have, so I don't have somebody to go to in that regard.
What?
If Beezy was here,
Hey.
she might take that on, but
So we have to deal with
It's
the,
shown a real interest in getting a grant for that. Do you think, do you know, I don't know, should I keep talking? Can you hear me?
yes,
Oh, okay. Hasn't Peg Stone showed a real interest in getting grant money for accessibility? Which
I
is
don't
still
know.
under-
she spoke
I don't
about
know.
it, but whether there's a real hard interest, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't mind talking with her if we thought it was a good move.
most of what I know she's talked about is the septic business at the town hall.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, if I get a chance, I'll check in with her if you want me to.
Well, um, so we've identified two things here. One is to touch base with actually sharing the space. To speak to Sandra, and then whoever she would want us, whoever else she says we should speak to about that. And then I really don't know what the plans are to implement the ARPA funds. I mean, I haven't heard anything about that.
They did vote some money for some things at one meeting, one select board meeting that I was in attendance at, which I forgot now when it was, quite a while ago. But there's still, you know, they haven't spent half of it. And I think that I suppose one of the things we should do is talk to Scott,
Okay,
is
Oh,
bring
yeah,
him
that's-
into bring him into a conversation on this whole matter of parking and that stuff there as our advocate. And I mean, we could have a meeting with him to just, you know, talk about some of that and see if we can get some ideas from him of how we could best push that whole idea. I don't know whether that's a project that could work with CPA funds or not. I don't know why it couldn't. I think that could be a CPA project.
okay.
So that would be another way to approach it. Ellie, not so much that I'm saying take that to the CPA committee just yet, but rather have it in your thinking how we might best broach it with that committee.
Okay. How do you see the parallel motion of what we need to do with the foundation and the accessibility issue, the parking issue? It seems to me that we should be tracking both of these at the same time, but I'm just trying to figure out the layers here. Our foundation really has nothing to do, getting that operative has really nothing to do with accessibility, but I think the other is going to be pretty hard to navigate. So perhaps we should start that pretty soon.
Which one are you thinking?
The parking, the feasibility of asking for ARPA money or CPA funding, and to have a discussion with the town hall and their needs to coordinate with us. That we should start that pretty
Yeah.
soon.
In terms of just the funding, we've kind of already started going up a path with the funding that has to do with getting started on the actual construction of the building. And of course, I'm assuming that the accessibility may have some grant money that we have not tapped into. So we might want to begin with that as opposed to starting to think about the construction of the accessibility parking.
Well, we've got this other grant to administer, and I guess I don't have a big appetite for.
But were
For
you
added
suggesting we
grant.
start working on the accessibility before the foundation? Is that what you were
No.
No,
I mean,
okay,
tracking both at the same time,
tracking them?
because I think that the parking will be more labor, and it'll be harder to navigate that.
well, it's not just our project,
That's right.
and we're really looking for other money for it.
And that's right. And
Yeah.
I don't,
Well, it
I
sounds like
think
it could
I think we should ask for ARPA money and maybe also for CPA money, maybe both. If it doesn't seem like one would be adequate,
Yeah.
or there are too many other pieces that are needed for either one.
To me, the
ARPA.
big thing with the parking up back is we've got to get some other people interested in getting it done. Being enthusiastic about the idea. Trying to get the money without some more enthusiastic backing is not going to accomplish anything. We really need to get some other people that are interested in it. And one of the problems we've got in that regard is the relative lack of use of the town hall currently.
Mhm.
Their use of the building has not bounced back since the pandemic. They've got a few things going on there, but nothing compared to what we had before the pandemic. And without people using it, we don't have those people as advocates for getting the parking improved.
Well,
Well, maybe the timing isn't right. Maybe we have to give it more time for a bounce back. That could be wrong, but
I will say that
timing's everything.
that at the meeting last night, there was a letter from Susanna Roberts, who is very, she's a principal player in the artisan fair. And she couldn't attend the meeting because she is in quarantine, unfortunately. But she did write a letter, and I'm trying to remember exactly how, it seemed at the very beginning of the letter, she introduced herself. Well, she's on the planning board, is that right? Or is the ZBA?
Might be ZBA.
Yeah, maybe
I
it's
think
ZBA.
she's on ZBA.
Yeah. Well, she mentioned the whole business of parking and traffic improvement, because that's part of the CMR, that's part of the Berlin Center plan. You know, that's one of the big aspects there. So I think she's an advocate, and if she's a member of the ZBA and our CMRPC advocates, I mean, those are people who could help us raise the awareness for it.
Well, she's a good squeaky wheel, and so it's worth talking to her about it. And secondly, go back to Pat Smith and even Evie and talk about it,
Yeah.
because that's an unfinished piece of the project for the elevator, and it right now I don't know who else we've got that would be advocates for it from the town hall side.
And remember that when I mentioned, I'm trying to remember exactly how it all played out. I think Pat Smith received our flyer for the yard sale.
Yeah.
Because she's a member of the society, and I sent that out to all the members and anybody else that I consider a friend of the society. And she was visibly upset that there would be a third event that day. And I told her that we wouldn't impact whatever we needed to transport. We would make sure that it didn't interfere that day.
Mm-hmm.
And that made her feel a lot better. That we wouldn't be having any vehicles going up and down that driveway when her vendors needed. And because the big concern is that there isn't enough parking for an event like that, which has been successful. I think from what I heard, not maybe directly from Pat, but from Mark Smith, was that that it wasn't as successful this past year. I don't know about, do you have a sense of the church's fair, Ellie? How, if they felt that was as successful?
They hadn't had a fair for several years, but I think that they thought it went well.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go because I had leg irons at the at the yard sale. But
Well, you did go get lunch.
Yeah.
I did.
June.
Well, no, Marty got it for me.
Oh, Marty got it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fair did
I'm going
did
to-
well, 6,000 to 7,000,
Good.
and that was considering that it was smaller than we've had in the past, and the thinner ranks of people working compared to what we've had in the past. It was really very successful, and certainly was greatly aided by the fact that the synergy of the multiple activities was important, I think.
Good.
June, if I
Yes.
can cut in for a minute, I have a little bit of a limited time thing going on here, and I wondered if there were any discussion of there's something else we
You
need to
have
bring up
frozen.
for it. But is there anything else on the agenda? Is there anything else on the agenda that I should definitely be here for? Because I'm going to have to cut out in about 5 minutes. And
Okay.
and then if you need to go back to this discussion, I just didn't know if it needed to be something that I.
I have a suggestion. I move to adjourn.
Is there any other business that we need to take up? I would like us to, I don't want to take more than 30 seconds here. I would like us to work on getting the mannequins relocated and the lumber
Yeah.
relocated. We could email back and forth, and I could post, if you all want to be involved, I could post a time, or we can just do it maybe 2 and 2.
I have a feeling that the mannequin discussion is going to lead into a slightly longer discussion just about, collection and how much of this and that we need. I'm wondering if we could do that at the next regular meeting. Would that make sense?
That's March 10th.
Yes. And then people will have a chance to think about the topic, and we can actually make maybe some final decisions about how many we need and so forth. But it feels to me like something that almost needs a nice chunk of a discussion because it's come up so many times. And then I think that will lead into which collections do we have that we want to, some of them that are collections of bottles for, medicine bottles, which is a very wonderful collection that should probably stay together, that we'll probably all agree on. But in terms of clothing, we may need more discussion. I don't know.
Well, we can certainly do that, but I would, in the meantime, perhaps, Barry, this falls on your shoulders to make some selection about with the mannequins. Are there any that you want to just get rid of? If you could do that ahead of time, and then that would be the base.
I can't indicate to you enough that when we want to do a big exhibit, we need a whole mess of stuff.
So that's something we wait and discuss when we have it on the agenda. I'd like to be here for that, but I don't know. Maybe that's just.
With a little luck, we'll have it all moved by then.
Yeah. And I would like to second the motion to adjourn and to bring this back later.
Is there any action item here that I need to?
Adjournment, you got to vote on one way or the other.
Okay, so I don't know what we're doing about anything except to meet on March 10th and have a discussion. Is that clear to everybody?
That would be my recommendation.
Okay, so we have a second. The adjournment has been seconded. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.